Welcome to Magic Arcanum. I'm Ryan Gomez, behind the scenes is Nicole Burdick, and we're so glad you're here because it's story time. The Black Lotus is one of the most iconic cards in all of Magic. For almost 30 years now, the game has tried to mimic its power and beauty, with varying degrees of success, but for most players, this classic card of yesterday seems to always be just out of reach. That's about to change thanks to the newest edition of Cubamajigs, which feature over 30 pieces of all new art created by some of your favorite Magic artists. But let me back up. What is a cube exactly, and how do you use a Cubamajig? Well, a cube is kind of like a Magic set that you design by using existing Magic cards. You put a few hundred of your chosen cards together, shuffle them up, and deal them out as packs to be drafted exactly as you might at your local game store with real boosters. It's a really fun way to play Magic and offers a ton of room for customization, and that's where the Cubamajigs come in. They are effectively slim deck boxes perfectly sized for holding a booster's pack worth of sleeved cards, which lets you replicate the experience of opening a new pack at the start of a draft. This just elevates the whole cube experience and makes it a really polished event. I mean, if you're going to take the time to hand select a few hundred cards, you want to make sure that they're well protected and given a gorgeous presentation, right? For just $15, you get 10 packs, already pre-made, no assembly required or anything like that, and they come inside a 400 count box with matching artwork, like this one. It gets even better because you can put all your Cubamajigs into this larger box called a Podamajig, which holds an entire cube worth of cards, or up to 9 commander decks, or maybe your Jumpstart collection. You can learn a lot more about the Cubamajigs and the Podamajig by following the link to their Kickstarter in the description of this video. Now, as I was saying, the Black Lotus is one of the most recognizable cards in all of Magic, and that's why they commissioned Donato Giancola to recreate it for Cubamajigs. You can also get that art on a playmat and as a token, which makes it perfect for use along with Garth One-Eye, but we'll talk about him in a bit. After seeing the new art, I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to talk about the history of the Lotus and look back at all the ways the game has tried to recreate the thrill of the original artifact. So that is where we'll begin. In August of 1993, Magic the Gathering took its first steps into the gaming world with an initial set that contained 295 black-bordered cards. Among them was the Black Lotus, an artifact that was free to cast and could be sacrificed to make 3 mana of any one color. In a game where your mana is your principal resource and it dictates the speed at which a player can develop their strategy, being able to leap ahead by 3 steps, even temporarily, can offer a huge advantage. And in the game's earliest days, there was no 4-card limit to deck building like we have now. So you could put together 20 copies of Black Lotus, 20 copies of Fireball, and 20 copies of Channel, and win the game before your opponent got to take their first turn. The raw power of the Lotus quickly placed it among the game's most impactful cards, appropriately called the Power 9, which included other fast mana sources, incredibly cheap extra turns, and incredibly cheap card draw. But the Lotus still stands above those 8 cousins as something truly magical. The concept of a supernatural flower can be found in ancient Greek and Roman mythology, and other stories from even earlier have probably been lost to the sands of time. The original Black Lotus is presently part of the reserved list, and as such, cannot ever be printed again nor reproduced through a mechanically identical analog. This restriction has forced the game's designers to get creative in how they keep the memory of the Lotus and its power alive. Their first attempt came in 1997 with Lotus Veil from Weatherlight. Instead of depicting a singular flower with a singular use, this rare land offered you the bounty of a whole field and a chance to tap into that power every subsequent turn, provided you could afford the upfront cost, of course. The idea that the Lotus is some sort of invasive species or requires tremendous effort to sustain at least somewhat explains why not every wizard or warlock has a garden of them to draw upon at their convenience. Anyway, the pendulum swung the other way for Tempest. Instead of a field full of flowers, you could now hold a single lotus petal. It provided just 1 mana of any color, but it was still free to cast, and so today it stands as one of the top 20 most expensive commons to acquire in all of Magic. Now, I don't usually include silver-bordered cards in my history videos, but for the Lotus, I'm willing to make an exception because it's fun to see how this iconic card has been represented in sets that are more tongue-in-cheek. So check out Blacker Lotus from Unglued, released in 1998. Artist Christopher Rush returned to create something that towered over his original Lotus, not just visually, but also in its ability to create mana. This time, though, the cost was also supersized. You had to physically destroy the card after using it, which in my opinion took the joke a little too far, but you could also see it as a wink at the increasing scarcity of the original Lotus, which had been out of print for 5 years by this point already. The next black-bordered interpretation came from Urza's Saga with Lotus Blossom. This was the first adaptation of the original that had a non-zero mana cost, though it would not be the last. In an attempt to balance out the sizable advantage of free mana, Lotus Blossom made you pay 2 up front, and then would accrue petal counters on each of your upkeeps. You could then sacrifice the card to create an amount of mana equal to the number of petals saved up, making you carefully weigh the right time to harvest your precious flower. I should also point out this was from a time when mana burn was a thing, and if you just kept tossing petal counters on your blossom without thinking about how you were going to spend them all in one turn when you cashed it in, you could end up doing some real damage to yourself. Next came Lotus Guardian from Invasion, who became the first bulk rare to bear the word Lotus in the title. Ouch. 7 mana for a flying 4/4 is not a great rate, even if it does have the Birds of Paradise ability. I think the idea here is that by guarding a field of lotuses, this guy, who is technically a dragon by the way, has gained some of their mana-producing power. Overall, this card is pretty weak and barely deserves to carry the word Lotus. Unfortunately, it is the harbinger of an era of underpowered Lotus cards. Gilded Lotus from Mirrodin continues the trend. It does create 3 mana, like the original, and it can do it repeatedly without sacrificing itself, like the Veil, but it costs 5 mana to play. That steep investment cost, along with numerous reprints being available, have made this another Lotus you can add to your personal collection for fairly cheap, which actually makes it an interesting inclusion in a not-quite power cube. Which, of course, you then want to store in a beautiful and thematic Cubamajig, right? Anyway, Mox Lotus is the other silver-bordered Lotus card, this time combining the classic flower with the classic Power 9 jewelry. For just 15 mana, you can create infinite mana while being immune to mana burn, which is less important now since that rule doesn't exist anymore, but I think this card better captures the over-the-top power levels that both the Black Lotus and the Moxen are known for, especially when compared to its predecessor from Unglued. Lotus Bloom from Time Spiral gave you the true power of the original Black Lotus, but it made you wait 3 turns to access it, which actually made it play more like its sister, Lotus Blossom. Still, in my opinion, this is the closest the game comes to repeating the OG card. It is free to cast, and it creates 3 mana of any color upon sacrifice, with the only restriction being time. But that's no obstacle for a clever mage. That said, players would have to wait 3 real years before seeing another new card bearing the Lotus family name, and that's Lotus Cobra from Zendikar in 2009. This little snake loves to exaggerate based on its flavor text, which boldly claims its scales contain the essence of thousands of lotus blossoms. I mean, sure, that landfall trigger is great, but it feels like you're closer to a lotus petal with legs than anything else. Anyway, the Cobra joins the Guardian in the club of lotus creatures who do not actually possess the power of a lotus. That club also has a very depressing yearbook photo. And that's because their membership grows in the Khans of Tarkir block, thanks to some additions from the Jeskai Way. Lotus Path Jin is a pretty forgettable common with flying and prowess, and some flavor text about lotus flowers blooming when mind and body become one, which is cute and all, but kind of a waste of a great name if you ask me. The one I'm really frustrated with, though, is Lotus Eye Mystics, because when they enter the battlefield, you can return an enchantment from your graveyard to your hand. Do me a favor, restart this video and count how many of the Lotus cards up to this point have been enchantments. Wait, no, I'll do you a favor, I'll just tell you. It's 0. 0! They're all artifacts, lands, or creatures. I understand that the needs of the set probably dictated that this card could get back enchantments and only enchantments, even though white seems to have other similar cards that can also get back artifacts, and in doing so, they would have at least made Lotus Eye Mystics relate to one of the most iconic cards in all of Magic in a 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon sort of way. Sorry, I had really high hopes for the Jeskai, and all I got from them was a bug that threatened to eat its own rider. Lotus Field from M20 once again put a Lotus in a core set, though we were back to it being a rare land rather than an artifact. You can tell that the field was inspired by the Veil, but it is different in a few key ways. First, the addition of Hexproof makes it much less likely that your opponent will punish you with a Field of Ruin after sacrificing 2 other lands to get this one out. To offset this, though, it does enter the battlefield tapped, making you wait another turn to draw from its power, unless, of course, you happen to use it in a deck along with Blood Sun or Strict Proctor, each of which offer a way to get around one of the field's drawbacks. Mystery Boosters gave us yet another way to experience the power of the Lotus, so long as we were willing to share it, and that's Mirrored Lotus. Now, if you have not seen one of these yet, they are a little confusing. These are mock playtest cards, and they're not legal for any sort of constructed format. They don't even count as being silver bordered or anything. Even so, Mirrored Lotus provided a fun twist on the original design by giving each opponent their own copy through the Reflect mechanic, which again I want to stress is not a real thing and might never actually come to the game in an actual set. We'll just have to wait and see. While we're waiting, perhaps we can play with a Nyx Lotus from Theros Beyond Death, which makes use of the Devotion mechanic to determine how much mana it produces. This seems harmless enough, but with the right support, you could win the game on the spot thanks to the abundance of mana this flower can provide. And now we come to perhaps the most interesting single card on the list, which is the Jeweled Lotus from Commander Legends. Earlier, I said Lotus Bloom was my pick for being the closest to a true Black Lotus, but I'm sure many will argue it is in fact this card that deserves the title. It does cost 0 mana, and it can be sacrificed to create 3 mana of any one color, but the restriction here, for me, is the deciding factor. You can only use that mana to cast your commander. Now, if this had created 3 mana of any color within your commander's color identity, like Arcane Signet, then it would have been useless still in non-commander formats, but it would have been closer to a true Black Lotus for 100 card singleton. As it stands, it is still one of the most desirable cards from all of Commander Legends, and it certainly feels like a Black Lotus in both form and function. There's one other honorable mention I wanted to toss in here, and that's Garth One-Eye from Modern Horizons 2. This legendary wizard can literally create a copy of the original Black Lotus, which neatly skirts around the reserve list while giving players a taste of the game's most famous flower. But how do you represent such an iconic card? Well, the Donato Giancola art for the Lotus is available as a token in the Cubamajigs Kickstarter, which would be a perfect complement for a Garth Commander deck, or for anyone who appreciates the beauty and power of such an iconic blossom. So what do you think? Has any card over the past 30 years come close to capturing the majesty of the original Black Lotus? Let me know down in the comments, and then make sure you check out the Cubamajigs Kickstarter. Then like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the great stories you'll only find here on Magic Arcanum. We'll see ya.